in feeding health. I'm going to hand over to Jude, who's going to introduce our customer.
Awesome, thank you Lisa, I hope you can all hear me at the back. I have had so much caffeine, I probably don't even need a microphone to be honest with you, but it is a pleasure to welcome you to this. Those of you who know me know I could honestly talk for about 14 hours about this without drawing breath, so I am going to be super quick to try and keep us on time, but also more importantly, to give adequate time to our three lovely speakers and then for the breakout groups as well, because honestly, as I say, I could do a PowerPoint on this until, 3 weeks' time, but I honestly believe the best way to get the most out of this today is through discussion amongst all of you about what you're doing, what you're thinking about, what's working on your farm, what you've tried that's a complete nightmare, because you can listen to academics with a PowerPoint all day, but actually that real life experience, that what we've tried that works is I think far more beneficial. So we know, of course, there is no one size fits all. There is no, if you just use this feed additive, or if you just have this breed of cows, or if you just have this type of barn, everything will be fine. There is no one size fits all. So it's always going to be a mixture of breeding and health and feeding and everything else that we do on farm. So even though we're going to split into 3 groups, one for breeding, one for feeding, and one for health, which are going to rotate around, please bear in mind that all of these are, of course, interlinked. And we can make great strides in all of them. So as Abby very correctly said earlier, productivity is a key part of it. And if anybody particularly wants me to bore them on it, I can talk for hours about how we've improved yields per cow, for example, over time. And that has cut the carbon footprint. But it's not, of course, just about yield. So, for example, we also know that if we use Jersey cattle compared to Holsteins, we can have a lower carbon footprint per kilo of cheese produced. And of course, health and welfare is an issue where we have huge gains to make. We know that on a global basis, we lose about 20% of our animal protein because of diseases that we already have cures or treatments for, but they're not implemented. And even in this country, we can make huge strides in cutting diseases like IBR, mastitis, BBD, Johne's, all the pig and poultry diseases too. I'm going to try very hard to be all-inclusive, but you'll see I do have a bias towards beef and dairy, I'm afraid. So we have a huge opportunity in front of us. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our three technical speakers. We've got James from Stabilizer, we've got Anna from Charolais, sorry, apologies, and we have got, where's my other speaker? Robert, sorry. My brain went completely a blank for a moment. We've also got Sarah Morgan, and we've got Ben Harman helping me in the breeding session up there, yeah, brilliant. And we've got somebody else on. Oh, Lisa is also being our health. Lisa's doing a dual role in being the facilitator and the vet for the health session. So with no further ado, I'd like to move us on to our first speaker in terms of the breakouts this afternoon, which is who would like to go first? Anyone have a preference?
I think that's me.
There we go. It's James. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for coming. I'm afraid I missed the first session. I was driving down from Exmoor. I don't work for Stabilizer, so anyone who wanted to hear about...
Sorry, I don't know why.
That's all right. That's all right. And I'm very much so I'm Breedr, so which is software, and I'm not going anywhere. So I'm going to talk literally for about 5 minutes, which is almost impossible, about genetics. And Robert, who is a genetics expert, is going to talk in much more detail. My background is that I'm a beef and sheep farmer. I'm also the UK country manager for Breedr. About 4,500 farmers use our app to record information about their farms. That includes weights, movements, medicines, and breeding information, most importantly. When we talk about net zero, and we talk about reducing our emissions, we so often talk about producing less or stopping production altogether. But at Breedr, the way that we look at it, and the way that I look at it, is actually, it's how much we are producing, but also how efficiently are we producing it. And I know in the beef and sheep sector, that's much more of a challenge than in dairy. In dairy, twice a day, every day, sometimes more on some farms, we get a measure of how much milk we are producing. On most beef and sheep farms, only about 40% of beef and sheep farms regularly weigh their animals. About 60% never do. So they only get a measure of how much are they producing on their farm once a year at calving or lambing, and then once every 2 years when they then kill those animals. So that's a huge lack of data, a huge amount of information we are lacking. So when we talk about productivity, there is a productivity gap. So the average daily live weight gain on a farm, 600 grams a day. The average on Breedr, which would be a self-selecting group of farmers, maybe on the top end, is 1.25 kilos a day, double. And that comes down to all sorts of things. It's not only how the animals are fed, but it's also about how they're growing. So when we talk about reducing our emissions, are our farmers set up in the right way? Are they actually recording any data? If they're recording data, what is it saying? How productive they are? And when we talk specifically about breeding, there are basically 3 key performance indicators. It's age at first calving, how many more months is that animal running around on their farm, letting off emissions before it is a calving age. How many are running empty? I heard statistics the other day that 400,000 empty suckler cows running around the UK because the farmer always thinks, 1 more year, we'll get it back in calf. 1 more year. That's a year of no productivity, not only for the farmer's bank balance, but also a year of emissions being let out. And then also, finally, age at slaughter. How fast is what they're growing actually getting to market? And the other thing to say is that I'm talking a lot about the individual farmer's productivity, but there are also much bigger challenges. How at a supply chain level do we prove that actually our supply chain, our country or our brand is actually reducing its emissions? If the individual farmer themselves won't record the data, how do they know how to share it up the chain? So I could talk for hours about this subject, about the individual sort of genomics and all of this sort of thing, but the very core of it, the way that we get farmers to decarbonise themselves when it comes to breeding is just recording data. You know, recording information on an app, recording information wherever, and then also weights, movements, medicines. It's so simple, but so important. So we're going to have some questions in a bit, but I think I'm handing over to the next speaker.
Yes, please.
Good morning. I'm a dairy farmer from North Wiltshire. I'm at 230 cows on a fairly intensive 3 times a day system, doing 11,500 litres, but we also try and maximise grazing, make the best use of grazing. Like a lot of farmers, I feel I'm under pressure to reduce emissions, and as ever they want something for nothing, and they're not going to pay us for it if they can help it, are they? I feel it's much like the pressure we had in 2017 to reduce antibiotics. And we've done that as farmers. We've halved our antibiotic use in the last 6 years, which is an amazing achievement. We've not really got any reward or praise for it, but we've done it. And how have we done it? By understanding when we needed to use antibiotics and when we don't, just by having a better understanding of what is good use of antibiotics. What we've done, by achieving that, it's reduce our costs in antibiotics, but we've kept the benefits from it. That's the point, is that we've benefited by doing that, as well as benefited the environment and the world in general by using less antibiotics. Can we do the same things with emissions? We've got the advantage over pigs and poultry that cows will graze, and we can grow clover and grass like this and graze cows. But we can't graze in February or in a flood like we got at the moment, or in a drought like we had last summer. So grazing cows is never going to produce the 1 billion litres of milk that is sold in this country every month. You can dive into carbon footprints and GWP of soil and all that sort of stuff. And it's something we have to be able to do. We have to be able to measure it, to manage it. There are a lot of experts here that make it seem very complicated. But in my simple head, I like just simple things, and to me, sustainability really just means efficiency. It's just getting more from less. It's good use of resources. That's all we need to do, is to improve our use of resources. High yield per cow, less cows, less snowing, less problems. And whether the public like it or not, economic pressure will result in that more intensity, be high yielding cows, faster growing beef cattle. It may be not what the consumers say they want. They like to see cows at grass, but as far as I can see, they're not prepared to pay for it. There's plenty of organic milk out there available which people can pay a relatively small premium for it, and they won't. Their sales of organic milk are dropping fast because people do not want to pay that premium. So it's up to us to produce that milk more efficiently without getting any more money from it, really, is the way I look at it. Almost more of a problem is the cost that we're facing in covering slurry pits and those sort of things to reduce emissions in those ways which aren't actually going to improve productivity or output in any way. That's more of a problem how we finance that than what we can do with cattle. According to BCMS, somebody's already alluded to, 8% of calves that are born alive tagged on farms die on farm before they reach 2 years of age. 8% of cattle have absolutely no production whatsoever despite consuming all those resources. The best operators are under 2%, so there's an enormous scope there to improve the productivity and just reduce that wastage. If there's one simple reason for that, it's just lack of colostrum at birth. It's not as simple as that, I know, but we all know that calves need enough colostrum at birth. A lot of them still don't get it. That's a simple solution to just improve calf survival. In proven British blue bulls, which we can use on dairy herds, there is an 80-day difference in slaughter age between individual bulls. The best bulls progeny go to slaughter 80 days earlier than the worst bulls, or not even the worst ones, the worst proven ones. That's a massive difference. As a dairy farmer, I was really only interested in Belgian blues that produced easy calving. Calves that were born easily, now we're keeping them and fattening them. That's a massive difference. An animal that can fatten 80 days quicker is worth something like 300 quid more than one that doesn't. And as long as they're equally easy calving, that's a big win. And it's almost at no cost. Semen from a bull like that might be £12 a straw, and a more conventional one might be 8 or 10, but it's almost no cost to have that extra gain. The problem is that there's no real system for paying that back to the dairy farmer unless you actually fatten your own cattle. In dairy breeding, there's even more potential. There are bulls out there whose daughters are £1,000 more productive, give more profit than the average, and they also they're more healthy, they live 130 days longer as well. That's a massive difference. And with the availability of sex semen, now sex semen is almost as reliable as conventional semen. There's the opportunity to select much more strongly from the best dams. So there are lots of ways of getting more efficient, better lifespan, longer lifespan. Cows that last longer is an obvious way to do it. Feed conversion, yield, productive life are all important. So this cow up here is Mrs. Ella. I checked in on her today. She's quite happy. How do I know? She's got this orange tag in her ear. All my cows wear these orange tags. They're like Fitbit monitors. They monitor their behaviour all day, every day. They are brilliant at spotting cows which are bulling in heat. And because they're working 24 hours a day, they're better at doing that than humans. They also have the advantage that they can spot any cows which are sick. Sick cows tend to stop eating, so I get an early warning if a cow stops eating. And I can do something about it. I can go and fairly sort of passive treatments with painkillers or yeast or energy drinks. I can make fairly passive interventions to try and make that cow feel better, get her eating again, and her own immune system will cut in and help her respond to whatever challenge she's suffering from, and that in itself reduces antibiotic use, but also helps the cow to stay healthy and more productive longer. So to summarise, there's no easy answers to sustainability, but there are lots of little things that we can do, and added up, they will make a big difference. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Anna Dinsdale. I'm the Ruminant Technical Manager for Jude Island for AB Vista. You may have heard of that. We're not producers, not dairy producers or fancy bits of tech. We deal with dusty white powders. So anyone wants to talk to me about that, I've got to spin the van at the end. So in all seriousness, feed additives are what we know, what we do. It's our little area, but it is, without being funny about it, all evidence based and all in support of not only efficient production, but also in the whole carbon efficiency scale of things. And so in terms of where we are, we know that there's obviously a carbon expenditure, carbon output from livestock, and a big slug of that comes from methane, which is a bit of a hot topic at the moment, and then obviously we've got the carbon side from feed and also the nitrous oxide. But methane production has actually been relatively consistent since about 1990, which means that it's still there, we're still churning the same amount out, but we're perhaps diluting it because we know that we're getting more efficient when it comes to actual production. Spacebar, thank you. Once. Okay, I'm going to focus on what I know. I spend a lot of my time talking about dairy, and as we know, everyone hates us at the moment because we feed cows, and that causes them to make methane. Unfortunately, you can see on that graph on the right-hand side here, we're kind of doomed to fail, aren't we? Because as soon as you feed it, it produces methane. How unfair is that? And not only with feeding it do you produce methane, but you also automatically then get a feed CO2 equivalent as well, because you've got to make the feed. And then where does your responsibility start with that? And that's been covered, I know, a lot today. But all is not lost in that actually people are doing it well. And this data, I should say, comes from one of our sister companies called Interlink, and they did a big survey of GWP of dairy farms in the UK, and I say these are just some of their findings, but there's a big difference between what the top 10% and the bottom, or the best and worst, however you want to look at it, what they're doing. So without us going down the revolutionaries, fancy white powders, there's already stuff out there that we can encourage our bottom 10% to do. But I'm not here to talk about that, I'm here to talk about what you put in the front end of a cow. I also talk about a lot what comes out the back end, if anyone's interested in that a bit later. There hasn't been any mucky picks so far. But I want to focus on the things that we can influence, and one is the enteric methane, and there are solutions out there. So you may have heard of things, methane mitigators. There's a few of them out there, I've just listed a few. They've been presented, there's a few like Total Dairy and things like that. And it's been mentioned actually as what's the return for me? Because a lot of these, whilst they're giving you the warm fuzzy feeling, you're reducing methane, actually they don't provide any production benefits, so why would you feed it? I look to the producers in the room. But they do, and they have been shown in trial work in universities that they do work, so it's just part of a toolkit. Feed formulation, that's a big part of what I do. As we say, dry matter intake is the main driver of enteric methane, so therefore we've got to think about what's going in the front end to potentially reduce that. Or for me, but the big part of that is the balance to then drive the efficiency. The more we get out of a cow, the more milk we get out of her, the more we dilute that methane. So that, and it's all about balance, and I think that's probably going to come up quite a lot today. And this has been touched upon, but for me, young stock nutrition is key. And I'll be honest, not something that we talk about a huge amount, certainly not in the feed additives world, because, I say I may be generalising, but we do have some people who do it very badly and see them as a sink of resource. Because what do for 2 years? They just belch out methane, they eat feed, they take up housing space, and they're not providing any return. So getting more through, so as Robert mentioned, there's a certain percentage you never make it to first lactation. Reducing that, for me, is the really only set bona fide way we can reduce the enteric methane, because if you've got less animals, there's less belching. And I think the second part of that is also the longevity of the animal, keeping her in the herd for longer. So that, to me, is kind of a three-pronged attack, if you like, on the enteric methane side of it. And then something else we can look to influence is feed CO2. I hope you can see that graph, but that's the milk to feed price ratio at the moment. Buying bought-in feeds, basically, it's not financially brilliant, so let's put it that way. That line basically says milk to feed price ratio needs to be about 1.5 for it to be preferential, and that red line is GB, and you can see, even with the fantastic milk price of last year, we didn't actually get there. So, looking at more locally produced, I'm not saying we shouldn't be buying bought-in feed. Yes, it's driving production, it's all part of this feed formulation balance, but focusing on what we can use from our own land, what we can use for co-products, byproducts, things that are produced more locally, reducing reliance on the dirty word, soya. Hate to say it, guys, but there's things that we can do. There are alternatives out there. And then these next two kind of go hand in hand, but these to me are crucial because it applies to every single person who has a cow on their farm. We need to focus on optimal rumen function and better feed utilisation. And the way I see that, I don't know if anyone else has got a manure pick, but this bottom pick here is from a manure sieve. I don't know if anyone does that regularly, but it's quite a nice way of looking how well those two things are being done, because that's getting the more out of every mouthful. And that's, again, I'm probably going to say that quite a lot today, but that really is key, and it's just another way of saying efficiency. Because if you look at that sieve, we've run water through a manure sample, and that, if you wrung it out, that top sieve on the left-hand side, and you put it back at the feed fence, it would look exactly the same as when it went in. If it looks the same as it came out when it went in, the animal hasn't done anything with it. So there are feed additive functions, there's lots of things that we can do to keep ruminal health good. And then in terms of feed utilisation, I say that more from every mouthful. We appreciate there are limitations, but, let's face it, things like lignin, stuff like that limit what we can do with feed. But if we can find ways to, dare I say, open up feed better for better rumen attack, if you like, again, that more from every mouthful principle comes back into play. I've no idea if that was 5 minutes, but thank you very much. So, as I say, let's focus on what we can influence. That's what I really want everyone. If you take nothing away today from me, that's what I'd like you to take. And ultimately, that's UK herd efficiency.
Okay, so firstly, apologies again, officially today, so I don't know why I kept thinking stabilising. Very much Breedr, as you can see from the chat here. There's
I've also got red Devon hat.
So yeah, now is your chance really to interrogate James, talk to Ben, I'll introduce it in just a second, ask questions and talk about what you do on your farms or what you haven't done or what you've thought about, and feel free to ask me questions as well, but as I say, I feel like I'm of some less use to some degree than with the practical farm experience that you've got here. Be aware or be warned if there's no questions and it really is trouble weeks, I'll start picking on people that I know. So Tim, you might be in trouble, for example. Yeah, please do participate, ask questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. And although we're talking about reading, of course, bear in mind that everything's interlinked as well. So we'll do our best to answer anything that comes up slightly more on a tangent, because everything with your partners is of course like that. So I'd like to introduce you to Ben as well. Ben is a Charolais breeder. He's on the board, as I am, of the National Beef Association. He's done lots of amazing things, including winning awards for his beef production. If you just want to do like a 2-minute intro and then...
I wear many hats, and I think the main hat that I'm a Charolais breeder is a small part of why I'm here today. I chair the British Breeders Club. We have a conference coming up next year just to get this out of the way. It's going to be called Green Genes, and it's going to be revolutionising cattle breeding for a sustainable future. That is our theme. That's fresh on the table. Please come to that. I've set on board of checks, cattle health certification scheme. Health being, I mean, it's not this room, but health being a massive part of improving our sustainability. I'm also the owner of the oldest pedigree Charolais herd in the country, and I also cross my Charolais with a Wagyu to sell meat, which I call Shagyu. And I think I'm missing a couple of other things, but that's enough of it.
So, anyone got any thoughts, questions, comments? Yes?
I don't mean to be controversial, but I hope the controversy is
Yeah,
absolutely.
please do.
So I'm an organic dairy farmer, low cost. We've done some recent soil samples on our organic matters. We've gained 3% on organic matter in the last 8 years, which is 0.36% per year. So our sequestration is 11 tonne, our output is 5 tonne. So our input is we're 6 tonne per hectare per year, better off than input. And I'm a real believer of low input, low output. Slow growing on grass is better than fast growing or high production on grains with the best soil alternative additive that reduces. You can reduce, in my opinion, you can reduce carbon output on intensive agriculture. You'll never make it sustainable, regenerative. I believe the only real way is grass-fed dairy, grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, and a massive reduction in monogastrics. And I'd like to be challenged on that.
I'll have a little challenge.
Well, okay, go on.
I don't pretend to know half as much as you by the sounds of it on how you're sequestering your carbon. What I do know is that maintenance is such a massive proportion of our output in terms of our carbon output and our methane output. And I can demonstrate that with some figures which would suggest that for a 6-month-old calf to put on 60 kilos of weight, it would take 90 kilos of feed. And for an 18-month-old calf to do the same 60 kilos of growth, it would take 275 kilos of feed. And all that extra is the maintenance requirement of this bigger animal. So to get an animal slaughtered at 12 months and a day, if that's where the legislation would allow us to do it, you are going to minimize so much waste in terms of their maintenance requirement. So I am sure we can all do better, and I can do better, and I dare say you can do better too. But I think we should bear in mind that keeping animals alive longer, however they're fed, is going to mean producing more carbon.
Helen said something very similar to me just before I came up, which is right, is that actually it's about efficiency, not about high output. And I maybe misinterpreted what I said when I first came up. The point is there is so much inefficiency in the industry, right? There are so many farmers who are doing a poor job at rearing livestock efficiently, not only for their own bank balance, but for the environment. And that's what we've got to work out. The bit I would challenge you about is the idea that there is one system that will solve all of our problems. There's not. It's going to be a very broad landscape, and that should be encouraged, because in years when your system is not profitable, not doing well, other systems will be doing better, and we need, in order to meet the nation's food security, lots of different systems. If we were all grass-based, all outdoor, only feeding grass, this year we wouldn't have any beef because of the drought last summer. But because of the way that our system works, beef is coming through the bulk beef trade because the price is good, and the system adapts to the market provides. So that's what I would challenge you on, rather than your point, which I do agree with, which is it's about efficiency, not about necessarily high output. But Ben is also right, feed efficiency in younger cattle is a key driver.
It's quite confusing though, isn't it, for farmers, certainly in Wales and in our hills with supply guys, that's where the challenge lies. A lot of them, native breeds are doing fantastic jobs of grazing up in areas which actually feeds into biodiversity, where the meat becomes a byproduct. But actually it's very conflicting if you think about a finishing age, for example, might be anything 20 or 30 months. So a lot of farmers come to me and say, look, I'm afraid I don't, we're saying on one hand we need to reduce age of finishing, but on the other hand, my slow maturing Welsh black actually is a very different product. And I suppose it's how we engage farmers. So a bit what you said, actually each system's very unique. Actually plays to the farm's strengths, perhaps rather than necessarily looking what's happening next door elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So I farm a lot. I've just moved up to Exmoor. We farm on Exmoor, my wife and I. So those suckler guys who are on the uplands are my neighbours, and I see the cattle going to market. And what they've done is they've put, Charolais limited cattle over native breeds. They're producing very large continental cross stores, selling them 12 months, and for a profitability purpose, that is the best way of then maximising their limited livestock unit. From an environmental sustainability purpose, it's not a good way of doing it, because they're selling cattle at 15, 16 months old that weigh 400 kilos, which really at that age, on a loader system, would be weighing 500, 600 kilos, would be finished within 2 or 3 months. It is a real challenge. If we look at the carbon cycle, chances are actually they're doing a better job at capturing more carbon than the lowland guys. But that then also goes to my other point which I made, which is that we talk about carbon at an individual farm level, but when you talk to the supermarkets, they want to know what it is for my supply chain. And that is an enormous challenge, because if a farmer can't even understand their own carbon emissions, how on earth can the supply chain understand that as well? Which is then how we get into averages, and then how we get into this problem of being like the hill guy doing a really bad job, when actually, in his context, he's probably doing a very good job.
As a little addition to that, ABP told me the other week that they slaughtered 195 different breeds and crossbreeds last year, which is a bit of a problem when it comes to repeatable quality beef. But it speaks volumes about what you're saying. Different people in different environments need a different blend of cattle, and I would argue strongly probably for a very feminine, probably native cow with a terminal side that has been proven to grow fast, be easy calving and have a short gestation, as being a way in which people in my area, which is lowland farming, can prosper, both in terms of reducing their emissions and being profitable.
Just to add to both of those, to be a bit provocative, given that we are talking about carbon and net zero and carbon and net zero, I think we have to do that with the understanding that, of course, carbon and net zero are not the only drivers that we've got to look at going forward. So, of course, we've got the social and we've got the profitability, but also biodiversity, for example, and all of those other factors. So I've been doing some work. I'm half-time at Harper and half-time I'm a consultant. As part of my consultancy, I've been working to look at the sustainability of profiting enterprises in the North Highlands, which is obviously very small scale, faces some real infrastructure challenges, disadvantages in availability of markets and abattoirs and so on and so on. And from a carbon point of view, frankly, at the moment, i.e. without GWP star, without carbon sequestration in all the calculators, they are going to look a bit rubbish. But from a traditional heritage point of view, using land where we can't grow other foods, even preserving habitats for ground nesting and wading birds, which need that grass to be kept relatively short, they are invaluable. So, as James quite rightly says, it isn't just about the most efficient system and everything should be, for example, housed and fed on rapeseed. It is about having that balance of systems all the way across the UK. And I think on any system we can improve efficiency. So even if you are slaughtering cattle, as Rachel says, at 28 months, for example, what if it's 27 and a half? What if it's 27 and 3 days? Like every gain will be a positive. And I honestly believe that on every single farm, regardless of our system, whether it be beef or dairy or pork or poultry or animal, there's always something we can do a little bit better. As part of my work with ABP here, we're looking at carbon footprinting 350 farmers across the UK, both beef and sheep. And that's been really interesting because honestly, on the best farms, it is difficult to find things to improve. They've got good growth rates, they've got good calving rates, they're doing everything right. But even then, there are little bits, even if it's saying, have you thought about feed additives, or have you thought about doing something slightly different just to cut your mortality from 1% to 0.5%? There's always something we can do, which doesn't mean everything must be highly intensive or everything must use a continental cross or a Jersey or whatever it might be. It's just those incremental gains all add up over time. It's identifying those for your particular system, I think, that can be really tricky.
But if you are here and you're sitting in this room, you are a part of the self-selecting group that care about that.
Yeah.
Because there is a vast number of farmers in the UK, and of which I am one, don't need the income from their produce, right? There are a large number of farmers who are sitting on very large assets, who've lived off the subsidy, and actually cattle, sheep production is a hobby, but that still makes a very significant proportion of the industry. And if they're not recording any data, so there are some very large strategic issues we need to fathom out. Sorry.
Thank you. William Waterford, consultant. Just taking up that point is how do we communicate with the uncommunicatable? Because they make up such a large proportion of the industry.
Nudge economics. I think it has to come top down.
But take the point from your colleague, they're hobby farmers.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't.
You don't have to agree.
Yeah, I don't fully agree that many of us are hobby farmers. I think there are quite a lot, but I think there are quite a lot of people for whom their livestock enterprise is maybe a small but nonetheless important part of their pie. And we'll let some buildings out, and we'll have some cattle, and we'll have some sheep, and they all contribute, and they all need to contribute positively. I don't think there's that many folks for whom they don't care about the losses that they will be making.
So going back to that point, how do you get those people who at the moment aren't farming profitably, who are keeping cattle and sheep and losing money, also aren't doing the environment any favours? How do you get those people on board?
I feel that we're in for a bit of a watershed, which is I think probably why we're here now and why the British Cattle Breeders Club is talking about the things that it's talking about. I think we're fairly close to a point where it's going to dawn on people. A few years ago, AHDB did a study and they found that 95% of suckling producers were losing money. but because of the way the support system worked, people were, as you were saying, not probably paying attention enough to the fact that they were losing money because it was part of a bigger pie. If we get down to 30% of our single farm payment this autumn, I think we're at 30% this year, aren't we? I think all of a sudden, even with £5 a kilo, things are going to become quite real about how our money's going around next year. So we're starting to look at ways of doing things better. And I've been slow on the uptake, and I'm like, hands up here, I'm a little bit behind the curve on where I ought to be in improving my grassland. And I'm working hard at it now, but I know that I'm late to the party. I should have been doing this before. And I'm improving my biodiversity with wildflower mixes. And I'm sort of part of that problem, if you like, because I was slow to recognise, plus I have a pedigree in life, and that makes things different because I can sell bulls for a lot of money sometimes, and that hides probably the true costs of producing some of the bulls that don't actually make it for a high value. So anyway, back to the point, I believe that nudge economics is the way it's going to work, and I think what the brilliant John Gummer was talking about earlier, we do need a government to support us and to nudge us in the right direction. And I'm not sure, I think Elms I think it was thought about as a concept at a time when Liam Fox was saying we're proud to announce that food security is no longer a target for this government. I was in the room as he did that. And I think if they were to start hatching something to replace the Common Agricultural Policy now rather than pre-COVID, it would look very different. Nudge economics, that's my answer.
But don't forget, in Wales and Scotland, they're still going to have subsidy at the moment. They've maintained the current levels until, really the end of the decade. So, in England, we're going to be moving away from that, but in Wales and Scotland, it's a very different system.
Sorry, I'll take that one stage further then. Where does the supply chain fit in that nudge economics? We're seeing it with the likes of Arla. What about the other sectors?
But when you talk about Arla, the number of suppliers they have, on Tesco's Align contract, it's what, 280 dairy farms supply into the Tesco's Align contract. You can have very tight control over that group, set very high standards. You go and talk to Dunbeer or ABP, and they're buying off hundreds, if not thousands, of farms every month. So you can't control your supply chain in the same way. Unless you're on an aligned contract, you can't control. I mean, they are using nudge economics on that because they've got the whole sustained farm centre across all 2,500 members. But what about beef and sheep, who don't have the same aligned contract? And that was the question: is what about the beef and sheep? And there isn't anything.
There isn't beef.
There isn't beef.
Yes. Top prices being our the details.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, we buy a huge quantity of beef at Breedr. Pardon?
It will be the economics there. They'll be paying higher price, and anyone who wants to be lower price. But so I buy a lot of beef at Breedr. We procure, on behalf of several large abattoirs. I tell you now, there will not be a premium for doing those bits and pieces you have to do for carbon audits and all that stuff. That will become part of your requirement. There won't be a premium for it because the consumer won't pay for it. Because if you look at the research, the consumer will align their purchasing to a brand that shares their values. They won't go to a supermarket shelf and buy a carbon neutral pack of beef. They will assume that everything in the supermarket matches their standards. The same way we do, you don't go and buy from Waitrose because you think that food is safer to eat. It's got a higher level of food safety than Waitrose, than Iceland. We assume that the level of food safety is the same. The consumer is thinking the same way about carbon and methane. They will align their purchasing with supermarkets that match them.
So can I ask you a question? Does that mean that the consumer, when they see red tractor on this and red tractor on chicken, believe both have lifetime insurance?
Absolutely. It's nonsense.
And I think the challenge, so I talked about chickens, but also sheep, beef farms, and there are a number of really major challenges to step back for you to start with decarbonisation. I would also say that if you're investing in changing the red meat system for your farm, for your children, the parents have to be totally committed to investing in money. And for many people, that's also really a challenge because we won't necessarily see the benefit of many of the things that we do. decision.
Well, Lisa's just told us that we have to move, but I want to get to this later because I've been very patient waiting for that.
I just wondered what your thoughts are on new genetic technologies, such as what will get available through the precision breeding bill, and how you think that might have an impact, maybe longer term, on decarbonising agriculture in total, and that impact compared with what we can do at farm level.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Precision breeding bill is not genetic modifications, gene editing, so it's not adding genes, it's changing genes that are there. Being, for example, to be able to make sure every bull you're buying is dehorned, even if that breed doesn't have a traditional polled genetics, is a great opportunity. As that technology evolves, we start to see that for emissions reduction, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I haven't got the right intelligent mind to deal with a question like that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. We're going to move on to the next group. You have got feeding coming to you, and feel free to ask us things at lunchtime as well. Apologies for rushing around so much.
Cheers.
We're sitting here.
Oh, we're staying here and they come to us. Oh, right, that's all right.
It's on deck.
Okay, so just been talking about breeding, so we're now going to come back round to the feed side of things. So we've already had Anna's flash presentation, so I also want to introduce Sarah.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Sarah Morgan. I work for a livestock consultancy firm. We focus on pasture-based systems, so we're working with mainly beef and sheep farmers and also dairy farmers across the UK through a number of discussion groups and various work to try and increase the focus on pasture on farm, so growing more grass and reducing the need for inputs, such as mainly concentrated fertiliser.
I'm Laura, so I've been doing Jude's sort of role of facilitating the session. And I think you might have already done this with Jude, but new information for us, but just a show of hands, who's actively farming? Great, okay, who's more industry consultant kind of side? Okay, and any other kind of roles? Okay, great, so, any burning questions on nutrition to kick off with?
I'm an Arla dairy producer, and Arla is Danish run, so it's pushing us down a high input, high output system, and it's almost outlawing grass as a food. They think that the level of protein in fresh grass is too high, and therefore they're going to penalise us on that. They're also penalising us on seasonality, where next year, by this time next year, on the current prices, we'll be getting less than 20 pence for our marginal litres. They are the main driver of sustainability in dairy, and they are in the process of basically trying to wipe out grass as a food. What's your thoughts on that?
So I know there's some good dairy farmers in the room that I think will join in on this conversation as well. I think the main things that we can do is just try and promote the value of grass, really. You know, when that marginal litre does go down to 20 pence, who are the ones going to be left standing? It's those more pasture in their systems, and I know it's annoying when we've got such good quality pasture. We don't need to be supplementing with concentrates that are often of lower quality and a higher cost, and at a higher carbon cost as well. I'll probably open it to if there's any other comments there, really, because I've not got huge involvement in the dairy sector, but it's a difficult one, and it's very frustrating as well, especially on the methane side, where often looking at just sort of diluting the problem, really, where if we maybe looked at maybe smaller cow size and things like that, how that could help electrolytes on inputs and things. So has anyone else got any comments on that?
I've had conversations with Jeff Harper and Mika Brass, who wrote the sustainability model, something so crap, we also are producers. And I was trying to explain to them that protein efficiency or especially organic, we don't have any nitrogen inputs, nitrogen in the atmosphere through closure of the grass and cow back into the pasture. There isn't an input and output, there's a cycle. And I've been able to get that through infrared.
I think a lot of it's how you define efficiency as well, isn't it? Because you're saying it's very high input, high output, so it's kind of getting a lot more from input, isn't it? So it's more output from input. And I think actually maybe we're going about this all wrong. I've had this struggle with the farm doing a trial with where we've actually increased milk with one of our feed additives by 3.5 litres. And then Muller, sorry, dirty word, Muller have turned around and said, no, take it out because of seasonality. It's just like, oh, and I've gone back to them and said, right, well, let's readdress what efficiency is here. Why don't we know what milk is good for Muller, we know what they want to buy, we know they don't want any more. Why don't we look at what's going in the front end and say, right, well, let's pull back on that. What strategies can we use there to get, sorry to bring it up again, but more from every mouthful? And I think maybe that's a connection that isn't quite being made in your situation, which is not, we don't need to keep doing more is more. Actually, sometimes it's good to, production-wise, stay where we are, but reduce costs, reduce input at the front end.
But the seasonality thing is bizarre because we will stop milking before Christmas and start milking again in February. When is the no solar available? December, January. Diddly squat, solar this time of year, we can cool all our milk with solar, but they can't get it because they are only Danish and they can only understand 100% house systems. And it's like, at the moment, it's the milk buyers, the milk buyers who are driving the job. If we can't get our own elected representatives to understand, it's really, really difficult. But, seasonality, Cheshire farmhouses had cheese made on the farm because there was a surplus of cheese of milk in the summer. It was a temporary activity, but it's almost as if at one moment they're saying all the carbon footprint is on the farm for products, but in fact they're being driven by the efficiency of their factories, which want level production, and yet they could get the benefits in reducing carbon footprint if they were a little bit more broad-minded about the factory. But it's not happening. Solar producing cheese in the summer, it would make sense. But it's all, and so I think the whole 10,000 litre cow fully housed seems to be the only way at the moment that anybody can see us getting a sensible carbon footprint. I'd be very interested, Helen, when you compared spring and autumn, is spring calving doomed, is really what I'm asking.
So when we did the calculation, our spring calving herd, which is on once a day, had a slightly higher carbon footprint per litre than the autumn calving herd. And that is about the methane challenge per litre. But I think the other benefits that you're indicating are huge in terms of when you take into account the sequestration and that we were out wintering and some of those, if you're putting up buildings to do it, the embedded carbon in those buildings and the concrete, there's a whole load of stuff that we need to take into account. But you're right, it feels right to be producing milk in the summer when you've got the grass growth we're certainly, our cost of production are much lower from a spring calving herd than they are from an autumn calving herd. So it's really challenging. I think that I hope that ARLA aren't going to push in the way that you're suggesting there, or if that's really worrying if you're just going to be forcing cows inside and looking at yield because of that methane challenge, without looking at some of the other co-benefits of spring calving and outdoor systems.
They're certainly going that way.
Yeah.
But that's the danger of having a focus on carbon, because in that conversation you kept saying carbon footprint. Actually, this is what we're talking about. This is what we manage moment. If you're using a carbon calculator that only looks at carbon, that's only a third of the story. Actually, to be able to push back onto ARLA and say, okay, you're interested in carbon footprint, I need to demonstrate my biodiversity footprint, and I'm not protecting the footprint as well. So actually, I'm going to apply this, that enable you to do that, to measure carbon diversity and water all at the same time. But the reason we've done that is to empower farmers to have that conversation with their supply chain. So if you're being pushed, down that route of lowering your carbon footprint, it gives you an opportunity to turn around and say, actually, it's not just about carbon, it's about everything that we're doing on the farm.
You were mentioning feed additives earlier, and with some of these feed additives, what do you think the law of unintended consequences might be of some of them? Because certainly we're being pushed in directions by government, and I don't want to discuss some of the commercial thinking is in some of this.
Feed additives. So I think disclaimer, as I'm from a completely feed additive background, don't hate me, is not every single feed additive is right for every single farm, and I think that's something that we've got to get our heads around. We can throw in gram after gram, hundreds of grams of it's got to complement your herd, it's got to complement your feed. I'm a big believer if you're going to pay for something to go in a cow's mouth, it's got to have a return on investment for you, because ultimately that's what keeps the wheels in motion, doesn't it, for us all? It's why like the big mitigation products, I'm going to be honest, even in the feed additives industry, I'm not sold, because I just think, I don't know whether it's part of Arla's 100-point plan that they can only think of 80 points for, but I don't know whether adding a methane mitigator in, you get your 0.03.
They're expecting that to happen in the future, yes.
My question to them, if it is like, yes, you get your 0.03 euro cent if you put one in, I'd be like, well, is that covering your cost of what does it actually do? Because it's what we talked about a lot at the BSAS conference, is putting that science of feed additives into actual application, isn't it? Because with a methane mitigator, you put it in, you get no production response, but unless we start putting glass domes over every single farm, how do we know you're producing less methane? How do you know? How long's a piece of string? You might be doing even better than it did in a trial, but we don't know. So, have you got any feed additives in particular that you've got?
No, well, I mean, there was a mention in the press the other day about one of the government things in 2 years, an update in 2 years' time as to what we should and possibly could be doing. I imagine they're looking at something like over from Holland, but I mean, so it's just that whole, as you say, if you pay something going in the front end, you've got to see a return on it, and actually the results might be because you paid something in the front, you've done a better job in the rest of the line of business to make sure you've got a return. So it isn't necessarily that product in the front end. You can do a lot more just by improving your efficiencies, doing other things, adding the additive.
So to me, I think it's where feed additives aid in efficiency that's the key. So I know I mentioned it up there, but for me, a feed additive that is not improving anything to do with health would be a good example. Ruminal function. There's a whole load of things out there that will assist you. It helps us to deal with the variations in forages, because that it's not even day by day, it's hour by hour, isn't it? Forages can change. And then being able to smoothen out those changes for consistency, that is where feed additives for me really come into play. And they do make up a bit of a deficit. And I don't mean that a terrible forage, a terrible feed, a bad ration, it won't take that from, dare I say, crap to great. They won't do that. They are not magic pixie dusts. They are, but they're not in that respect. What it will do, it will take something that is already working really well and make it a lot better. They don't make up for deficits in bad rationing. They don't make up for complete deficits in bad forage. And that's my opinion of it. But I do think they have a key part to play as part of the strategy. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so also kind of with a similar background to yourself, I think this links into the question earlier on why all the farmers aren't listening or why they're not thinking about this. It's a matter of trust. I think a lot of people are worried that there are companies like ourselves in the industry that are trying to make a living out of selling feed additives. But there is a massive variation in feed additives that are there. I am also a bit sceptical about methane focus, because ultimately sustainability is everything. It's profitability, it is food security, job security, all of these different things. And methane, if we look at it biologically, is a safety mechanism to get rid of hydrogen. So if we dampen down production of methane, where is nitrogen going? That is then where there is the issue to force down the throat by processors. So I think part of the issue is trust, part of it is credibility, and I think as an industry, what both Anna and myself are looking at in GB is feed efficiency. And a lot of that, before we look at it, is management and genetics and environment. And if we can get the animal working well, they can utilise that nitrogen to make propionate, to then make glucose, and so improve efficiency. So, long story short, there are better things to focus on than specifically to reduce warming and to do it in a sustainable way. But make sustainability the study of sustainability for sustainable environments. And if we can focus on that, then people will trust the story more and more people will get involved with the discussion.
I agree that focusing on genetics and efficiency are the sort of key things that will help reduce carbon overall. Now, unfortunately, one of the nicest things that you can probably feed livestock in general is soil. That's highly efficient. It's good for building protein, especially in chickens and pigs, and it forms a chunk of TMR ration. So where are we in terms of finding a more sustainable alternative when the buying public may see soya like palm oil, that there is no sustainable solution, even if you can go out and buy certified product?
So we've had a bit of a sort of discussion in the previous room, the S word, we knew it was going to come up. So I think there's a bit of a scale, isn't there, with soya use. There's using it, and there's not using it. And there's all kinds of different options in between. So sustainable soya, is it round table? Can we reduce it, supplement it with something else? So there's lots of different options. There are dairy units out there who are non-soya and doing fantastically well, and whether it's there's protected protein sources out there. There's obviously there's rapeseed that's obviously in terms of carbon expenditure is a lot less and dare I say a lot greener. And it's really, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name up there, but it's when we start talking about it from the feed additives and how they can support, because we've all heard of protected amino acids and amino acid balancing, and do animals have a protein requirement or do animals have an amino acid requirement? And it's actually that trust and that faith in that well, first of all, the science is there that they work. A lot of what is involved in my job is, does it work on my farm? Because it might work on 8 cows at Illinois State University, but is it actually working in real life? And I don't just mean that from a production benefit, I'm talking about from actual cost to you guys as well, the efficiency of the financial side of it. So it's there's that kind of the trust and the proof of principle, and me coming and saying to you, oh, that soya that you're using, well, you're going to take that out, we're going to supplement it with what might be deemed a lesser protein with this magic pixie dust. Would you trust me?
Not yet.
No.
It's just a very high protein, high energy sort of and cheap product. I'm not saying it's necessarily good, but if you're dealing with monogastrics, it's the go-to sort of product. For ruminants, you've got the option of grass and other things, but it's there in the TMR. And there are lots of discussions going on about, well, should we move away from soy and find other alternatives? Because then you avoid the sort of direct and indirect land use changes in places like Brazil. And I'd say there's probably no easy answer at this stage, and we probably need to make sure that there is a market for the sustainable alternatives. That might include insect meal, it may include peas and beans and so on, but there's no pricing signal for that. And therefore, if you're a farmer interested in producing those sustainable sort of alternatives, why would you go into it? Because the market's not supporting you to do that. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation at the moment.
It's just exactly the same conversation that we've had in the room. Is that if there is, who's driving this? Who's going to drive it to change? Is it incentivised? Are we the interesting conversation we had in the other room was about
tying in with other people as well. So there was a gentleman there he had a lupin crop, didn't he?
Yeah,
He was like, but no feed will buy it. So what do we do? And then this another gentleman said, well, actually, you know, I don't buy feed because I buy straight. I'd be interested in that. And I think that's a big part of it, is that sometimes that maybe there is the consumer drive, the consumer want. It's just maybe not quite where we expected it to be. And how we open up those lines of communication. You know, we can't say that smoke signals of, you know, I've got a load of lupins I want to get rid of, you know, who wants it, you know, and we all, you know, come to also, it's,
yeah, but I think there's definitely big opportunities, especially, you know, the beef and sheep sector. There's definitely enough protein in grass, and, you know, a lot of use of Charolais and things coming through now where we can grow lambs at 300-400 grams per day. There's not a need for that concentrate there. So if we're managing a good system, and it's similar on the dairy as well, if we've got good pasture in front of them and we can grow it and use the proteins that we can grow ourselves out of the grass, that's the most direct feed source, the cheapest, you know, it's leaving the most at the other end as well. So yeah.
You're going to hate seeing me off. I think just, Graham, you had a hand up, so quick point.
The point maybe you're not kept on the end of it, it's not a problem, it's on protein efficiency. When you were talking about the spring grass and spray, it is great for producing other what was explained to us was actually the surplus protein that's available in that period of time of the year costs you milk, because the shedding of the excess protein actually costs you energy. That was the point trying to make that trying to be efficient. Effectively, we should restrict the grazing to make it efficient rather than wasting the extra protein.
Yeah, I guess there's plenty of opportunities looking in that direction. You know, farms, often dairy farms, quite a lot using quite a lot of nitrogen and things. Is that needed? Can we look more at multi-species lays, which can reduce the issues of that? But yeah, no, I get your point. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we are being moved on, so I'm now going to hand you over to Lisa and Robert. Okay.
So you can talk to us in tactic to keep you all awake and engaged. The speakers keep changing. Yes. So for the last bit before lunch, we're going to be talking about how optimising health in all different livestock production systems can help reach net zero. Some practical insights from Robert that you have started to hear earlier today, and then we'll open out to the floor, hear what somebody else you guys are doing, ask more questions. If there's any vetty things, I'll try my best to answer that I may be able to facilitate. But just a show of hands, active farmers in the audience? Cattle? Pigs? So we've had like one or two in each room. Poultry? Everything? Sheep? Sheep. Those in the industry, any researchy people?
Consultants.
Consultancy. Policy? All right, mixture. Right, brilliant. That helps us to know a bit more. Right, Robert, over to you. How can you practically improve animal health?
I said my main focus really is on the cow management tags. They've been a tremendous advance in looking after animals because they give you this early warning if the cow is sick, but also they give you the data to look back what went wrong with the individual animals. So, for example, what we call transition management, 80% of disease in cattle occurs within 3 weeks of calving. Most of that is down to calcium deficiency. Calcium is an important element for muscle contraction, so a cow that's severely calcium deficient can't stand up. She's moderately calcium deficient, she can't push the calf out, she can't push the cleansing out, her teat sprinklers are open so she gets mastitis, and her gut doesn't work properly so she can't absorb any calcium. So getting that right is really crucial just to cow health and cow survival. These tags really help. They monitor temperature. All cows that have got milk fever have got cold ears, but it also works the other way, that if you've got a cow that you're not very happy with and she hasn't got a cold ear, you know it's probably not calcium, that's the problem. So you can look back and see what went wrong with an individual cow. Did she stop eating 2 days before she calved, or 4 hours after she calved, or whatever, and you can address that and do something so that doesn't happen to the next cow.
How have you used data to pinpoint what you need to do, improve your treatment and care of cows?
Don't know where you're going on that one, so.
Well, how you read, so if it gives you an alert earlier than a stock person would, or lots of time rules, how you choose which ones you go to.
Yeah, I think what it can do, it doesn't take away the need for a good stock mode. It focuses you on, if you've got 400 cattle, you can wander around looking for ones that aren't very happy, but cow manager will focus you on the ones that you need to look at. So you can go and look at a specific cow. I had one the other day that she came up with an alert, she stopped eating, couldn't see anything wrong with her, so I gave her some painkillers. Next morning she had a big lump on the side of her ribs, and some other cow had beaten her up. But you can get in and do something about that before you can actually put your finger on what was wrong with her. Make her feel better, keep her eating, keep everything moving.
Any burning questions?
I think one of the points that came in the presentation was about attending to the young stock first, because obviously a lot of the health issues you have to get the young stock first, whether it's beef, sheep, anything, it's that early start that's probably more important than the adult animal.
Yeah, especially from an efficiency perspective, you just start and get 8%.
Yeah, I said earlier, 8% of calves that are tagged, so born alive, die on farm before they reach 2 years old. If I lost 8% of my milk, I'd be absolutely bloody livid. And the best operators are well below 2% of losses, so it's quite achievable. Go to America, they treat their calves like precious baby animals that they are. They have controlled environment, clean sheds with the right environment, and they really look after them. Over here, we chuck them in a Victorian shed and expect them to survive. But if that number are dying, 25% of those deaths are within 3 months. So a lot of them are dying of calf diseases, pneumonia and scares probably. So if some are dying, there's a lot more that are damaged. If their guts are damaged or their lungs are damaged, they're never able to reach whatever their genetic potential is. They won't reach it because they've been damaged as baby calves.
I'd like to reiterate the point you made earlier about the importance of colostrum, and we rear a lot of calves on a spring block calving in one fell swoop, and the change in terms of how quickly we get the colostrum in, so we aim for half an hour for every animal, day and night, and we've achieved it this year. We've reared 250 calves without any problem at all, but we're also seeing at the end that they're finishing 6 months earlier as well, because the proportion are beef animals, their growth rates, we're monitoring those as they go through. So we get the benefit, and I do, and my father puts it down directly to the start they get, the colostrum they get, the management and cleanliness. So the attention to detail makes a huge difference as well. So
yep. I used to spend hours trying to get calves to drink out of the bottle, and you get fed up after 20 minutes, it's only drunk a litre. So now for the last 3 or 4 years I've just used trusty tube. I tube 3.5 litres down as soon as I see them. And that just saves so much time and aggravation that every calf has got the right amount of colostrum into it. And let's just say we treat beef cattle exactly the same as dairy cattle because they're a valuable resource that you've got to look after.
It's funny, we've done exactly the opposite. I did tube everything, and now, if at all possible, we use the bottle, because then they're straight onto a peach teat, and they seem to get onto the teat feeders much quicker. So it's like everything, we all go round in circles.
Yeah. We haven't tubed one this year. They've all been with the peach teat because that's what they move on to.
And what we find is that once they go to their pen, and they've been the tricky part is the one that's been with the cow too long, because she's really difficult. Those are the calves that are difficult to do with the bottle, because they've had a bit of mum. But there's that crucial window about half an hour after they're born when they'll just drink anything from a teat. But it is like everything else. You go through phases, don't you? And then you swing the other way.
Find your farm-specific solution. Get a hand up over it.
Is there data out there then to show us how diseases are affecting productivity? So for the farms I work with, for them to invest in things like, we've got a few watery mount problems, so for them to invest in really high hygiene standards, cleaning teats and things, is there data out there? Because I just think there's a lack, or the farmers are getting that data to know we're going to invest this much, and then, do you know what, our daily level gains are going to most likely pay that off.
Definitely figures for a cost of toxic mastitis will cost you this, or the cost of not getting your dairy cows into lactation. So for sheep, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I think like cost of land losses, it's all in different papers, quite nice. Hey, anyone from HDB here actually? I think they've got like a whole little summary. Yeah, so the land losses one we're probably not as good at, but it's definitely like, you get this disease, it costs you this much per cow per year, or if they don't reach this age, this is how much it's cost you. It's like feed, energy, labour,
There are some things, I'll fess up, I work for Genus, but we're working on a PERS-resistant pig, which we're expecting to get licensed, and that basically eliminates, that particular disease, which is pretty devastating for the industry. And so I think, as you'll see with gene editing, it'll be possible to select animals that are resistant to some of these diseases, and then as a farmer, you'll be able to sort of then go, right, well, I've had one to this in the past, it's worth paying for that option if it eliminates that disease from my business.
So just bring you remember the cost of your tax and use that data to weigh that case up.
Yeah, somebody asked earlier what these tags cost. When I bought them 5 years ago, they were €40 a piece. They're now on a rental scheme, about £1.80 a cow a month. I spend over £1,000 a year feeding each cow, so £1.80. Which is a really good investment. When we first put them in, our death rate halved that year. We had 14 dead a year before we went down to 7 dead. The first year we had the tags put in was paid for it easily in itself. And it does heat detection, so I don't have to stand out there in November for 20 minutes trying to spot which cows are on it. So I wouldn't go back to the old system.
Sorry, that's Jude.
We've discussed a lot about data today. Just finished a 5-year project with 500 dairy farmers where the level of data collected and known by the farmer has been very, very poor. There's expectations that the dairy sector is better than the beef and lamb, but there's a huge wide range. And we're just talking about, we know that animal health can improve the carbon of the methane hugely, but how do we get the general farmer to actually understand the importance of measuring and managing?
I think we're all under time pressure, the same with this carbon account and whatnot. You can spend hours and hours trying to account for every kilo of fertiliser you bought. There was a presentation at HDB, had a presentation by Alex Bax the other day, I don't know if people saw it. His view was actually, the data doesn't matter, it's just getting the bloody results is what matters, and if you don't have any disease, you don't need to record it. So it's sort of turning on its head, really, and that's, it's like locomotion scoring cows. You spend hours looking at cows' locomotion scoring, and what matters is to pick the bloody thing up if it's lame, so not the locomotion scoring.
Start somewhere.
Yeah.
Jude.
I suppose it's sort of linked in really to a lot of this. So obviously it's important to understand the return on investment for improving health. But as farmers, how also do they be understanding return on investment in terms of decarbonising for those health benefits as well? And actually how far are we thinking about that?
We're working on LCAs for our sort of genetics, so that those health benefits, in particular with fertility, we can then quantify that in terms of carbon. And nitrogen and water. Yeah, sorry, it slapped me. But so life cycle assessment and looking at that whole life impact, not just carbon, but water, which is important, and so on. So I think that information is the actual key going forward.
Helen, I might bring you in here because this was I did think global farm exchange. This is like the sustainability parameters. So it's how do we measure essentially what you're saying, the carbon benefits, the health benefits, the social wealth benefits, how that's
Okay, thank you. I think it's incredibly important that we are measuring all of those key things, not just carbon, because sometimes there are real tensions and trade-offs, and every farm's different. We need to be able to work out what's the right thing for a particular farm in their situation to concentrate on. And the real trick is how do we standardise those methodologies so that everybody, you're comparing apples with apples, because there's an awful lot of arguments about which calculator, which approach, and all that kind of stuff. And none of this will be perfect, but what we need is an industry-wide standard so that we are all improving together, we kind of are comparing apples with apples, and we are looking at this end around, not just through one set of windows. And I think if we do that, we'll learn really well together. because none of us have got all the answers. We're going to learn a lot more. There's going to be new technologies, new opportunities coming through. But I think if we can have a standard way of collecting that data, of sharing that data in a way that keeps farmers in control of it, and where they're getting the benefits from that, that would be a huge advantage. And that's what Soil Association Exchange is trying to do, working with other people everywhere. There's lots of people doing stuff, and saying, how can we actually get this as good, as practical and easy to use as it possibly can be, but accurate enough, verifiable enough that we can stand up to scrutiny. Let's all be a big part and work together to try and get this stuff sorted.
Yeah. It's a hard task.
Hard task, but very, very important task. Otherwise we'll swing around.
Yeah. Maybe check that.
Yeah, I was going to just say that we're talking about health, and the one profession that we're not actually mentioning that's very much related to health is actually the veterinary side of things.
Yeah.
And everybody that's in here that's involved in animal production will have a vet, has a health plan that is actually completed by their vet, and farm insurance are people that are supposed to be making sure that that's actually adhered to. And I sort of vouch to say that there are probably three things that probably don't happen very well. You know, we do actually have a lot of areas that were already in place that we would make capacity.
Lisa can't say this, can you? But my experience with Lisa has been in the antimicrobial reduction programme, and there was massive resistance from the vets about not using critical antibiotics because they were making money out of selling them. So I always learned to sort of not trust the vets to give you advice on that sort of thing. And we've progressively moved from using antibiotics as the first line of resort to a last line of resort, and using a lot more painkillers and yeast and drinks and that sort of thing, which vets never advise you to do. Vets never look at a cow, I'll stick some antibiotics in to cover it, and they're wrong about that. So, okay, we've got to go through this health plan, but do you really trust vets that they're independent, or are they trying to sell you a drug?
There's vets and vets.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think it's 100%. I used to be a cattle foot trimmer, and what I do on my farm, my cow's feed, is different to what I used to do on people's farms, because we used to go there and see that cow once, and we wouldn't go back to that farm for a month, so I had to cover that animal with everything I could, because that farmer expected me to sort that cow out in 10 minutes with one treatment. So we block it, we bandage it, we do everything. When we've got vet students on farm, I'm saying this isn't what I suggest you do as a vet, this is what I can do as a farmer, because we're locomotion scoring these cows at least twice a day. When they leave the paddock, when they leave the parlour, when they enter the paddock, when they enter the parlour, all of these things, we can monitor that animal. So actually, it's education that farmers will help the vet to be able to use an iodine battery rather than the white Palczynski drench, because they're going to say to the farmer, you need to keep an eye on this cow. If she's not right in 48 hours, I don't know the time frames, then you give it the Vita Mox, the white drench. But actually, first we're going to wash it and we're going to give it the iodine.
Yeah. Hands up, those who've got livestock farms, if your vet comes out to visit you more than once a month. There's a lot of hesitation.
Oh, it's every day.
You have to use your vet.
Yeah,
like a routine or yeah, or
It depends what time of year.
On average,
to assist with breeding methodology and to help the team, but then from July onwards, we're lucky to see them from Yogi's management or good use of medicines that can train the team, AI courses, so they're doing a lot more peripheral monitoring of what we do and helping rather than intervening on a fire brigade basis.
Yeah,
I think that's Hannah said, the vets, and that's what they need to move, to be advisors who understand our situation rather than drug sellers.
The other thing is, we as farmers will live in isolation, and the vets don't live in isolation, so that things get picked up around the area and around the farms, and actually be useful back in your own business. So if you've got a health issue, then actually you use the vet part of the team, you're not in isolation.
It's the knowledge, sharing that knowledge around.
I think that's an interesting point. I'm an ex-vet and now a dairy farm. And the thing I actually miss out on is not going to as many farms and knowing what's going on the ground. And while I can do a good job for my cows, I'm not, I appreciate what you said.
Yeah. In the last few minutes, I want to get some key kind of like take-homes or like key routes to success for optimising health. Like we haven't covered already. So I'm glad you said vets, because this is the first group perhaps, isn't it? They are a resource there to use. I think some of you are using very good ways. Got about data. I just want to say something about data, because there is a thing of like having comparative data, good quality and accurate, but I think when I started doing the antibiotics groups with you in here, that data was actually really hard to get, full of holes, pain in the arse, to be honest. But what we did have was costings. And over time, if you measure the same thing over time with yourself, so based on costings, you can still see improvements, still track change, and then slowly you can gather the actual data about medicine use. But I do want to just emphasise that, start somewhere. So it's something to collect and monitor against. And in the pig and poultry guys, please poultry up there, wouldn't you? What's your one thing that helps you optimise health in your flock?
Data monitoring is a lot more prominent across the sites than it probably would in the livestock side of things. But again, some of the issues we've discussed in the previous groups, our exposure to things like soya is far greater than other livestock systems, so that's where we're focusing.
I think having autonomous systems in poultry or real-time data, one of the challenges in many of the other livestock systems is the lag phase, which means when you get the data, you can actually do something about it. In terms of Jude, every 7 weeks you can change how you do something. Whereas with many of the others, say sheep, for example, you wait a whole year before you can implement change. So the granularity of the data, what it relates to individual animals or the whole lot, for time scales is really important. Many farmers can't adapt as quickly just because of the time scales of their production system.
Tim, you.
Can I add to Louise?
Oh, yeah.
We were breeding, going ahead on down the whole genetics route, visiting farms in Brittany and wherever, saying that was going to become a requirement in the future. But we're really struggling to find genetics now that will suit without reducing our gene pool significantly. Norwegian Reds, they do have a tendency to head down that way, but the ones that are more efficient and suit our grazing system now would be the Irish genetics and New Zealand genetics, and they don't necessarily concentrate on those areas. It's just a health point that discourages another veterinary intervention. But if we can edit that somehow, but I'm not sure whether that will be allowed.
I was going to say, what's the thought about gene editing? It's quite easy to take that gene out, isn't it? But then you've got an animal which is unsaleable, so.
Yes.
I was going to ask you about the health and welfare impacts of agroforestry.
Agroforestry health, well, we've got a lot of talk about that on the opening session, and certainly something we've been doing, trialling with Harper, willow trees and other breeds of trees. I was interested to hear that they will inadvertently lower our carbon footprint by reducing the methane. We do feed them, we probably don't manage them as well. More knowledge. The Woodland Trust are very open to people experimenting about agroforestry, and they don't have to impact on the production. They actually can, as Stephen Briggs was saying, can stack your businesses and have some wood outputs or other benefits as well. So certainly they've had a bit of a hard time because we've had bulls out amongst them during the winter time, so the willow trees aren't necessarily vertical anymore.
But the bulls are happy.
But the bulls are happy, yes. Yeah. So, and we wouldn't have been able to do that if we hadn't have had the agroforestry. They would have had to be in sheds, so they're outside, they've got shelter, they've got extra feed and some different, and moving away from monocultures as well. We're actively trying to get different tannins, be that chicory, plantains, yarrows, clovers, all sorts of different clovers into the beds.
Because any farmers calling that silvopasture as well, so they're looking at it, it's agroforestry, but they're looking at how they're slowly embedding, sequestration, compressor, and shade from livestock. And Lisa and I have been involved in a project where we've been looking at positive welfare and sheep, and this whole idea of how you provide sheep with positive experiences and working with farmers to see how they are either providing lays or many things, just providing shade and being able to demonstrate to people that are buying their land that they are intentionally providing positive experiences for sheep. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
So is there a different level? Is there silver pasture, and then if you're really good at it, golden pasture?
The following up with bringing some of the pig guys, key to success in getting optimal health.
Well, probably my system is controlled from some other systems. I mean, for me, and pigs don't stay very well if you give them access to soil. You know, early access to soil is the way. Even in Texas, when I went to see my very farms in Jamaica with the indoor pigs, she always used to put soil into the farrowing pens, to make sure those pigs got early access. So for me, you know, outdoor soil, getting some access to soils, and late weaning, other things that mean that we've hardly ever used any antibiotic ever on the whole system, but we are a very different setup to your intensive indoor food system.
So you use it with pig farming. That was that. We had some of the points before, wasn't it? It was the biosecurity and reducing risk, pesticides, going to the abattoir.
One of the things that the big industry's got, and the chicken industry's got, that generally like the ruminants haven't got, is the ability to destock and start again. And when I was in big practice, it was amazing because the really clever ones could sort of anticipate big cycle and say, well, I'll depopulate that unit, then they go to BSE and they get the clean stock and start again. And but I don't think we can do that. And certainly in my neck of the woods, which is Cheshire, IBR, because you can't go clear of IBR in Cheshire. It's floating there in the wind. But if you're in Suffolk, you probably can, because the cattle population is completely different. So I think it's got to be horses for courses, even to do with which part of the country.
Yeah, absolutely agree. That's Cheshire. Right, brilliant. I just want to wrap this up now and get you fed, because it's lunch. Hopefully we missed the crowd, so that's straight in. But there's a load of things that you guys have contributed. Some of this will be circulated around close to the bed. I can give you some food for thought for lunch. You can take home your own businesses. And if you've got any questions for Robert, float around. You can have dairy cows, but also beef. Thank you. Round the floor to it.